Thank you for joining us at our NWN Carousel podcast series. This is episode 12 that we have done, and today we are joined by Carla Guzzetti from Extreme Networks, who's the VP of Customer Experience, and Dan Dulac, also from Extreme Networks, the VP of Solutions Strategy. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Zane, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the evolution of the network infrastructure, how it has to change. I think that we've had a lot of, quick changes over a very short period of time that I don't think was necessarily expected by most organizations. But it kind of gave us the realization there are certain elements of our networking infrastructure that is maybe not as evolved as it should be, and I think that we're looking to, see what that's going to look like in the future. So I think everybody's heard about, and in some way, shape, or form, the fourth industrial revolution or the digitalization of organizations, and as they're trying to evolve, and I think that with the introduction of cloud and looking at the introduction of a lot more remote work and things like that, it's been how do we evolve that infrastructure and that over a period of time. And I think that everybody had this 4 or 5 year plan ahead of them that they were thinking about, and said it, and then comes along COVID-19, and all of a sudden they had to do all of this stuff in a month.
That's right.
And a very short period of time. And so I think that this has now had a significant evolution. It accelerated the evolution, and I think it's calling it the industrial revolution is quite appropriate, because it's often violent and abrupt, which define a revolution. So kind of give me your thoughts, Dan, on what has happened over the course of the last year and what you've seen, and how it's going to change.
It's been quite interesting to see, certainly in our industry, where all of us technologists, Carousel, Extreme, many of us technology vendors and partners in the landscape, we're always pushing the edge of digital adoption and the next gen greatest thing since sliced bread. And even despite all this, pre-COVID, companies were still somewhat lagging from a digital transformation standpoint. And my opinion is because it's hard. It's change. Human nature, we don't like change. So to adopt a new deployment or a new architecture or a new bit of technology to further enable your business, it could be risky because it's a change, right? New technology might have to train more people, might induce security vulnerabilities or risk. There's lots of things floating around that are really, challenging the status quo. But what COVID did, as we all know, it forced it. If you want to survive, you better change, because the stores aren't open. You're going to have to figure out how to support and service your customers using technology, which I think is here to stay. And I really do think there's a silver lining in anything. And I think with COVID, the silver lining is for businesses to survive the long haul that made it through COVID, that are even today still trying to figure it out. With the right support of technology, they will figure it out. And that's where, Extreme and Carousel and all of us in the technology space, that's our key jobs right now, is how to help our customers survive, and not only survive, but thrive. So it's been pretty interesting just to watch this whole thing, despite the horrors of a pandemic, try to look at the silver lining side of things, and there are some there.
So I think that the way we've worked has changed forever, and it's the kind of fits into there's no longer going to be this everybody come into an office and whatever it is, and I think that there's going to be this new norm. So I was kind of interesting in that this aligned quite nicely with Carla. I think Extreme came out with this theory of infinite enterprise. I think that's the term that you've used over there. And talk us through that a little bit, because I think it aligns really, really nicely with what's happened.
Yes, well, that's exactly what kind of spawned the idea of the infinite enterprise, which was introduced by our CTO and CPO, Nabil Bukhari. And this is what he's set for our Office of the CTO to think about. He believes, and what we're working towards, is that networking is going to be infinitely distributed in the future. And we're talking, the next 5 to 10 years, and that we're actually already operating in a new normal. It's not, getting used to the new normal. It's that we're already here and we're working our way through it. And that networking has to be infinitely scalable, infinitely flexible, and most importantly, it has to be really customer centric, because let's face it, if you have an infinitely distributed network, what you're talking about is that you have people who are not as savvy as IT managers out there helping manage a network, which means that you've got to take something that's very complex and make it very simple for anybody to potentially troubleshoot or to be able to handle in this distributed environment. So, it's definitely that we are operating in a new normal, and the hybrid workforce is a perfect example of that, right? There was a time where we thought it would be crazy to have 2 phones, it'd be crazy to have 2 TVs. Well, why is it crazy for us to think about we're going to have 2 networks? You have your home network, you've got your secure business network. And because how long are, IT CIOs and IT managers going to go out there and be like, yep, totally safe for you to connect through AT&T. No problem. We don't have an issue with that. That is going to come around, particularly as your workforce is further distributed. So we're getting prepared for that reality. And to your point, and to Dan's point, companies need to think about that right now. And it is digital transformation. It's an industrial revolution brought on by this pandemic. And I think, and also a great, to Dan's point, silver lining of this is that the generation that's coming up, Generation Z, is expecting this of technology. It's expecting it of its work environment. And the pandemic has forced us to think about that and to do this now. It's accelerated this technology. So we're going to be able to meet those expectations now.
Yeah. So Generation Z is an interesting group. I mean, I know over the course of the last 18 months, there are kids coming out of college that are just introduced into the workforce. This is the only normal that they've known.
That's
this
right.
is literally this is the normal. This is
Exactly.
the way they want to work, and this is the way they want to continue to work. And it's going to be hard for us to say, well, now you have to go back into a brick and mortar type, office, and you have to be there 4 days a week, and you've got to work your 8 hours a day. And I think that, so in your experience, Dan, have people felt that are you getting more out of them working from home, working remotely, working from anywhere? Is it more productive, less productive? What are your thoughts there?
It's a great question, Zane. And I'll speak from personal experience. I've been far more productive working from home. At minimum,
that's because I stalk them over Zoom.
At minimum, I save 2 hours a day commuting to the office and home, right? 2 hours. That's a lot. That's a big chunk of my day. And so, sure, there's pros and cons of everything. But from a pure productivity standpoint, I think that's another one of those silver linings. I think the productivity, at least in our business, and I know in other, traditional retail, it's hard to be productive when your stores aren't open, right? Yeah. So certainly there are vertical industries that are really struggling, and hopefully on the comeback now. But from where we play and what we do, I think we've been more productive than ever, despite, the pandemic.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that there are definitely verticals that are struggling because they traditionally operate in bricks and mortar, but it has been an incredible opportunity for innovation. Mm-hmm. We have, for example, the experience team being collaborative and creative. Designers typically are together. There's a whole idea of keeping your designers together, getting everybody to think the same way. We've had to think of how are we going to collaborate and brainstorm when we're remote. How do you whiteboard when you're remote, and what are the tools that we're leveraging in order to do that? And also, for retail, it's a great example. There have been a tremendous amount of new innovations in how people are shopping and aligning with brands because they don't have that bricks and mortar experience. How do they translate that into a digital experience? It's, it's fascinating. I think it's also here to stay. And going back to Gen Z, I think, they are being asked to go back to bricks and mortar, and they're actually saying, no, thank you. We're going to go and work for the company that's going to let us work remotely because we want to control our day.
Yeah. So, I think that's I quite like the idea of working remote. I've been doing it, fortunately, for the last 10 years, and finally everybody else caught up with me. I think it was one of those. I saw this COVID-19 a little bit as like the ultimate IT "I told you so" moment, because you should have done your digital transformation already. It's like we've been telling you for years. So I think that's really it's kind of evolved, and it's become this this kind of this monster all on its own, and we've moved in this direction. But I think that there's an element of it that comes along, which is what are the security implications? How do we address this now in terms of they want consistency in the experience. They don't want security shouldn't have an impact on the way they work and they operate, but they want to be able to do it from anywhere. If they want to sit at a Starbucks, they should be able to get the same level of security and controls and that sort of thing over there. So, and I think that kind of comes now into how does the technology have to evolve, and how does this? It's no longer your routing and your switching and your the wireless infrastructure. It's no longer about what we're doing at a brick and mortar. It's now how do we experience this irrespective of where we are. It was kind of an interesting thing that I saw. I think it was Amazon just now recently released it, where they're sharing all your like network connectivity and kind of proximity sensing, or using your IoT devices at home. And this is kind of that next thing. Now I know where everything is based on a relationship to something else, and it was kind of that next generation. So, and Dan, maybe back to you in terms of what do you see happening with the networking infrastructure and how it needs to evolve.
Yeah, so I'll save the technology bit for my second comment here, but my first comment really is more of a philosophical one, which is think about now you're working from home and you've got your own personal network. You're browsing and surfing and streaming and listening to music and videos, all your personal stuff. We as individuals care about keeping that personal data separate from our work life and our work data. So when you think about the IT enterprise and the IT administrator, and they want control of anything business. So if it's a home business network, a home business AP, a home business laptop, and the applications running on it, they want control. But now that's sitting in your home. So it's this philosophical question of trust. As a personal individual in the protection and privacy of my own personal data, how am I assured and guaranteed that's not getting mixed up with my business data? Because I don't want my business to see all my personal. So as we bring home life and work life together, there really is, I believe, a philosophical hurdle we're going to have to overcome. And how do we give a user, a home worker, the assurance that their personal data is kept personal and private? Their work data is secured and managed by the by the IT staff. So how we do that, some of it's just going to be, a psychological hurdle we've got to get over. But I do think there is an opportunity for technology to make sure that there's clear delineation, whether that's a set, like Carla mentioned, whether that's a separate home network that IT deploys that is a work SSID, and you only authenticate and connect your work devices to it when you're working. That's kind of a hard and fast kind of delineation. Or is there applications, a dongle we could put in a laptop that when you're logged in, it connects and encrypts and sends its data separately? We all know when we connect to VPN, we know not to do anything private because work is going to get access to that data, right? So again, there's going to be this, this learning curve, this trust barrier that I think is going to be thrust upon us. And how do we use technology to create that walled garden, so to speak? And that's our opportunity, as a technology vendor in this space. How do we do that? Carla mentioned it. How do we do that at scale, infinitely distributed, but also with experience in mind? But just before this call, the three of us were chatting about when we have a Wi-Fi problem at home, who do we call? We don't know. We've got to make it more serviceable at home, more consumable, right? So.
I would the only thing I'd add to that, and I know that the question was a technical one, I'm going to let Dan answer that, but I think, Just to add to that, I think since we've been talking about what's coming up next for the next generation, everybody said data is the new currency. I mean, we've heard that for 2 decades. I think they started saying that in the 90s. But data is going to now truly be a new currency. I think part of building that trust is also exposing companies, whether they're, who you're working for, or even if it's to the consumer level. I think consumers and workers are going to have to ask and educate themselves, and we are going to have to help them educate them on this is what's happening with your data. This is how we're intending to use your data. You're seeing it in GDPR in Europe. I think you see it with CCP here in California. And there are several more states that are adopting this in the United States. This is going to become the new norm, which is tell me where my data is, tell me how I'm using it. And, that what we've been saying for decades will finally become true in practicality, which is data is your new currency. How is your medical data being treated? How is your work data being treated? What is your ISP doing with your data, and how are they sharing that with Amazon? These are things that people have a right to know. And I think Generation Z, as they've been more comfortable living virtually, as they age, they are definitely going to be more concerned about how their data is being used, and that demand from our companies to expose that, to track that, to feed it into them. The people that address that sooner rather than later, they're going to be the ones that enable and engender that trust from that next generation.
Yeah, I was going to say, Carla, Gen Z, they don't care about data now because they have little to no assets to worry about.
Yeah.
But to your
Exactly.
point, as they age and grow, and now they have assets and bank accounts and all this stuff, you're darn right. Data protection and privacy is going to become paramount. So
I sat down my 16-year-old niece to tell her what TikTok does with her data, and she immediately uninstalled it. She was like, okay.
Yeah, TikTok and Facebook and everything else that has all your data. You've got to be very, very careful about what you're putting over there. So interesting thing about the data privacy and COVID-19 as well. Everything's about protecting that information. And one of the interesting things for me was that happened now recently, where they're trying to encourage more people to go and get their vaccines, is that you're automatically entered into a lottery. Isn't that a HIPAA violation?
Right.
It's they're sharing the fact that I got my vaccine, and they're putting me into a lottery. So who gave them permission around that? And that's kind of an interesting thing around the use of their data. So there is personally identifiable information. So, in terms of the home networks and how do you make that separation, you do get your IT geeks, sit at home, and I've got 4 SSIDs at home that, depending on what I'm doing, and I've got my 2 laptops that sit on my desk. The one is for my personal and one is for my work, but not everybody is going to have that sort of infrastructure. And I wonder if the technology is there for us to be able to do that at scale, like you said, Dan, is that separation and that isolation, and what do I send home with the users, and how much is 5G going to have an impact on this? And in terms of is it I have my 5G network and I connect home and that's my business one because that's how they want me to use it, or is this is there something that's going to allow us to be able to split that out? And I think that the technology is not necessarily there yet, but I'm kind of interested in and what needs to change and what are the timelines that we're looking at for kind of this kind of thing.
Yeah, we think about, 5G is a good one. I'm glad you mentioned that. We think about 5G, and it is still at its infancy. There are use cases that have been undiscovered on now the promise of 5G, that's what we're all excited about. Yeah. But the implementation, it's going to take time. To roll it out in a meaningful way where more people can identify these undiscovered use cases to make our lives better, because that's what it's all about ultimately. But in the meantime, that's probably, a 5-year horizon. And in the meantime, we strongly believe that Wi-Fi, certainly 6E, with a whole new spectrum that's going to be opened up for Wi-Fi, these two are going to play together for the foreseeable future. There's not a 5G versus, a 6E Wi-Fi network or one or the other. We believe that it's going to be both. And, the rule of the infinite enterprise, as Carla described, we're going to rely on 5G technologies to continue to extend that infinitely scalable and distributed network. You couple 5G with Starlink, think about, what SpaceX is doing with Starlink. 60 satellites, Starlink satellites at a time are going up. We're gonna extend connectivity to areas around the globe that they'll be discovering the internet for the first time. And again, there's going to be businesses that are going to pop up and flourish in these parts of the world that traditionally just haven't had connectivity. So, when you think about how all this comes together, it really does. I think the next horizon is, to your point, Zane, what goes in the home? Like from an IT shop, where does it go? How do you secure this data? How do you connect people? And then how do you make the experience so simple? Because it almost has to be consumer-like. You can't expect these home and networks we all have our own IT administrators behind our closet that we like to lean. I'm mine at my house. Carla, we were chatting. Your husband is at yours. So
I've got my husband fixing things left and right.
and that might be, although we can't rely on it, technology might push that more, where at every home, you gotta be comfortable with an app. That's the extent of it, right? I mean, because that is the lever that really we run our lives. Our lives are run by apps. Let's face it, whether we like it or not. And I really do think network infrastructure, these technologies we're talking about, Wi-Fi, 5G, setting up home environments, how IT is going to extend security, control, provisioning to the home, it's all going to be done via app. And, that's the horizon that we're excited about, driving towards, because, again, I think there will come, the pendulum's kind of swung, everybody work from home. Now, even at Extreme, we're reopening our offices and we're letting the employees decide kind of where they want to be. So I think in general, there'll be a happy medium, but I do think the landscape has changed forever because of the previous productivity belief I have and the improvement of it and so forth. So that's a crystal ball. If anybody can answer that question about, what's the answer, Zane, to your point, give me a ring. Because I'll make a bet.
Well, and I think everything settles down, right? We're not the first industry to go through this, right? To have this kind of revolution of being disrupted, and you've got a disruptor coming in 5G. Every type of solution finds its place. And frankly, the customer-centric revolution, I think, has been long delayed in networking. I'm very excited to be part of Extreme and to be focusing with Dan on customer centricity and what that means, and how do you make something that seems so unattainable to the average user. There's so many people that I talk to, the average consumer, they're like, I don't actually understand where the internet comes from. They're like, I understand where power comes from. I understand how I get my water, but I don't actually understand how I get my broadband. Like I call the people, they send me the box, I plug it in, it works. And, I think now is the time to start to educate people on how that, and it's our job. And what Dan and I are obsessively thinking about is, how do we make that easy? How do we break this down into easy bits of communication, easy bits of experience? Because frankly, it's time for networking to start to think about that in that way. And the pandemic has only accelerated that demand.
That's right. And what we do know is when something, put it this way, when an application doesn't work, you go to click Netflix and you just see the pinwheel for 10 seconds and then the app dies. Or you go to your phone and, you have no Wi-Fi signal. It turns our worlds upside down. Just like when the power goes out, our worlds are upside down. So the expectation of connectivity is on par, I would say, with power, with water, right?
It is.
It's that important. But yet, Carla, to your point, it's such a mystery still, right? And that's what we've got to address through some very creative, out-of-box thinking, an app, think of it as an app generation type thing where the network isn't a piece of hardware or wires behind the scenes. It's exposed via simple apps that can be managed,
So I think that kind of introduces an interesting point now, where we've seen now a much more rapid acceleration into the adoption of cloud. We've seen, whether it be public, private, whatever else it is, a lot more of the infrastructure, even within the traditional data center, it's no longer just a single server that serves a single purpose. It's all about the virtualization, and kind of people are building those. Now, the network needs to extend from that home office to that physical data center, to the multi-cloud environments that they're using, plus all of the different SaaS technologies, and there's all of these security controls that have to go along with that. Part of that data protection, private information. So when we're looking at, how this needs to evolve, once again, your networking becomes much more, instead of a physical box, now it's a virtual switch. It's that segmentation. A lot more of this. There needs to be a lot more automation, and I think automation is going to be key around this, the self-healing of a network as a result of something went wrong, or the things that we're finding in the in security in general. It's about the fundamentals that are not done right. So I didn't upgrade or patch my firewall. I didn't patch my endpoint. A lot more of that just needs to be pushed down. It just needs to, automatically happen. This got updated. It's like your Tesla. You wake up one morning, you've got a new software version. It's just there. It's one of those things. It's and I think that needs to be, kind of where the whole networking infrastructure and the security controls around that. And now, we're still seeing a lot of security controls are a bolt-on. It's an add-on to something like this. And there is a really tight integration with a lot of the networking infrastructure that is in place at the moment, but it's still a bolt-on. Right. And I think that's also one of those areas that really needs to evolve and quickly, because security is not, it's always 2 steps behind, it seems. That's right. So I think that's another element that is going to have to change quite significantly. When we're looking at zero trust security architectures, reference architecture models, Dan, maybe how do you think, in terms of what's there at the moment in terms of the networking infrastructure, and what is maybe the changes that will have to happen over there for, zero trust being not only the endpoint and the user, it's the kind of the infrastructure and the controls and kind of SASE technologies coming in there as well. So what are your thoughts around how that needs to evolve, and how are we going to catch up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Zane. When I think about security, there is no one solution that secures everything. Security is all about layers, what I call layers of the onion. The more layers you have, the more secure you are. But the flip side of that is it's more maintenance. There's more patching. There's more this and that and the other to keep this environment secure. I think our customers in our industry can look at this quite simply from 2 perspectives. One, from a consumer and user perspective. So I want my data. I only care about my data, and I want protections from my laptop, my mobile device. I want protection from everything that's out there. Protect me from all the boogeymen that are out there. That's what I care about. Now, an IT organization, enterprise, what they care about is I want to protect my IP, my intellectual property and assets, my network, from all the boogeymen out there. Well, guess who the boogeymen are in the world of IT eyes? Us. We're the boogeymen. Yeah. Right? So there's really two conflicting perspectives, but when you think about technologies like network access control and authentication mechanisms, and to your point, networking doesn't have to be a piece of hardware. It could be a piece of software. Silicon, the speed and the cheapness, the affordability of silicon to do line rate packet processing at even a 10 gig speed via software on today's latest laptops, that's not far reaching. So if they have the ability to put, to your point, Zane, it's not a bolt-on, it's a built-in to a piece of software, whether it's a piece of VPN software or other technology. We innovate on fabric technologies. We've already, call it, disaggregated what we know as network operating systems from the hardware in preparation for this very step, so that customers could deploy an entire switching solution, 100% software, right? Now, the physical hardware, ASIC, that might be commoditized, meaning you go to Amazon, buy your 24-port switch, but it's got zero intelligence. You buy software from Extreme, you lay it on, and you get all the capabilities, security controls, et cetera. So, these are some of the things we're thinking about. on how do we build that layers of security onion without being kind of, call it, boat anchored by physical hardware. That's the challenge that we're all working towards right now.
Yeah, I think that the layered security, the layered with defense in depth, and I think that everybody always talks. What I've seen a lot of, network traditional security architectures where they've got, your firewall sandwich type thing like this, and they think that defense in depth is, one firewall and another one all protecting on the same layers on the OSI model.
Right.
So it's layer 2, layer 3, and it's all doing the same thing like that. I'm worried about the stuff it's not seeing all the time. So I think that, and doing it software. So coming back to my Tesla example, where it just, you wake up in the morning and it's upgraded, by having it as software and have this self-healing, and these bug fixes can just be pushed down, and there's just this natural, consumption and extension of, new features and functionality that it just happen to be there now. And it's turned on.
What's important about that point, Zane, is guess what that's all driven by? Cloud.
Yep.
Right? So in a network operation, we can employ the similar philosophy, upgrade patches, security fixes, and you just come to work and it's there. That's nirvana. And the cloud is the key. That infinitely scalable capability is offered by cloud. That's the key to it. That's the key to it. And that's an area where, obviously trying to really frontier and put a lot of investment in solving. Yep.
And to Dan's point, I think you have to align the boogeymen, right? You got to think about, our challenge is not only how do you infuse that security at every step, right? So you've got end to end, but then also how do you align those needs between end user and, IT manager, so that, you're aligning that and that it's addressing both of that. And we have to think through what that means. What does that look like? What are the different use cases? And that's our challenge every day to think about that.
It is. And you nailed it, Carla. I think, again, human nature dictates when we experience something for the first time. Maybe we just got our home network upgraded, a bigger pipe into our house. Now we're at 10 gig. Oh, it's great. But guess what? We've just set the bar for expectation. If tomorrow I leak down to only 8 gig throughput, guess what? As a consumer, I'm hugely disappointed, even though I had 1 gig yesterday. So it's all about setting expectation and meeting it, not exceeding it, just meeting it.
Yeah.
And that's really the key.
Generation Z will never know the pain of a 14.4 dial-up modem.
No.
It's just one of those things, and it was interesting. I got a note from my provider at home, saying that you can now upgrade to 2 gigs. I'm like, awesome, I need it. None of my equipment supports 2 gigs, inbound, but I need it. I need to have that now. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but exactly that. It's setting that expectation, and I think that more and more, as those services become, accessible across the globe into areas, having grown up in South Africa, there was certainly, still very much a copper network that's out there, and not that much fiber, and it's definitely not accessible. So, SpaceX and what they're doing over there is certainly going to make a big difference over there, and especially in the developing nations. Now, that introduces probably another 2 or 3 billion people that are going to be able to access infrastructure and services and tools, and it globalizes, all of those businesses instantly. Those small little businesses, everything becomes now automatically global. So one of the things that I also think about is the, kind of the impact of OT and the IoT and what that's going to. We saw with the pipeline and how that went down, and there was kind of, yes, you as the end user, there was probably somebody involved on clicking on a link and something like this that got malware infection, and the recoverability and the redundancy of their architecture. But there's also that element of how does the network need to evolve in order to be able to isolate those points instantaneously, so that there is no large-scale impact to the corporate infrastructure.
Yep.
I think that's going to be something that has to change quite significantly as well. I'm not sure how much of that you're seeing yet, Dan, but I think certainly it's something that needs to be considered. Yeah.
Well, we see it a lot, and how these security incidents happen is it's very silent. And to your point, Zane, you mentioned it. Somebody clicks a link and it deploys some type of agent, and all it does is listen. That's all it does. And it listens for a while and then figures out, okay, is there another vulnerable point, what we call east or west, looking east or west, my neighbor, the next hop switch, the next hop device. Let me go do, inspect that thing. And so when we think about security at extreme, and certainly this kind of comes back to our campus fabric technology, given that that's a SPB-based layer 2, meaning there's no IP addressing. That's what hackers are looking for. They figure out next hop through its address, through its IP address. And when you think about how do you create a stealth network so that even if somebody is infiltrated, they're blind, they don't know the next hop. That's a key first step in locking down an environment. It's almost like the analogy I use is, sending a letter via snail mail, the old school way, through the post office. Imagine the post office receives this letter and it's got information as to where this letter needs to go with some code, but there's no physical address. There's no return address on it. So even if somebody infiltrated the post office, got their hands on this letter, without the decoder ring, they have no idea where it's coming or going. There's just no way. And so, when you think about looking at how we can leverage Ethernet technology in a non-standard IP way, where there's no addressing, hackers are blind, right? It truly is stealth. So, extending this to wireless is the next kind of frontier for us as well. So, like we said, that's not going to solve everything. There's no one solution that's the security solution, but it's a key layer. It's the key common denominator that links all of us together is the network. And boy, what a great place to start to create a stealth network so that we put the stop from an infiltration right at the beginning. They're just blind.
Yeah, I'd love to see how that works, in terms of, once again, extending, you've got the campus network and there's a way to do that, yeah. But extending that now into cloud and home, the local coffee shop, yep. And, all of that sort of thing as well. So I think that all becomes part of your infinite enterprise. I like that term. I like that analogy, and in terms of what it means to us as a whole. So that kind of brings us almost to the end of what we've got time for today. But are there any closing thoughts? Something that, in terms of based on the discussion, where you think something that we want to close out with?
Carla, I'll start if you want, and hand it over to you. So I like to boil these things down really two simple concepts, and for our customers, our partners, any technologists around the world, I really think there's two key concepts that I like to think about in helping move kind of this post-pandemic digital transformation is really two things. One is we've got to become every industry, every enterprise around the world needs to think about how to master the use of real-time data. I truly believe those, and there are many examples of this, those that master real-time data are those that are leading the way, not only in digital transformation, but they're leaders in their own right in their industry, right? So that's number one, real-time data, mastering the use of real-time data. And then the number two is mastering the use of emerging technologies. There is so much new capability that, again, let's face it, IT shops, A, just as human beings, we're resistant to change. B, they're spending so much time firefighting, there's no time to really invest in strategic thinking about that emerging technology that might help. But in the end, emerging technologies is a difference maker. Those that adopt it first, again, usually end up leading the way. You remember in 2007, when the iPhone first came out, there was a company called Uber who figured out how to use the location services engine on that thing before anybody else. Hey, we can put a map, we can draw a driver to rider together in a dynamic way using real-time data that makes that traveling so much easier and more convenient. They figured it out. They mastered an emerging technology with the use of real-time data. So I'm going to get off my soapbox there, but I really do think you can boil a lot of this down to, and the underlying infrastructure is the means by way you deliver all that. And that's the tie into Infinite Enterprise. So with that, Carl, I'll get off my soapbox and hand it over to you.
Yeah, that's a lot to take away from. So I think
that's a lot.
That's a lot. If I'm gonna double down on what Dan said, I think it's disruption to our industry is here, and I think that to Dan's point, sometimes disruption is scary, but the reality is it's an opportunity. Once we get over the scary part, then we recognize it's an opportunity. And sometimes we need to slow down to think about what's next and think strategically about what's coming up. And that's what I would urge partners, customers, everyone to be thinking about. Is the pandemic has brought around permanent change. We are in the new normal already. It's already here. So now's the time for us to be thinking about, how is that going to change your end customer? How does that change how your employees work? How does that change what your partners or customers are going to need? And to start thinking about addressing that. And if cloud isn't part of that solution, then you maybe need to rethink your priorities, because cloud is here. It's here, and distributed networks are what we're going to be looking at in the very near future. And it's something we're going to have to grapple with. We've identified a lot of gaps. There's still a lot of answers to be made, but I think the companies that address those gaps, that are thinking about that, how are they going to solve for those problems? Like Dan's Uber example, that's going to revolutionize how everything comes together, and how we continue to operate in the future, and how they access those areas that we've talked about that are going to be introduced to the internet. And with Starlink and everything else, you've got whole new numbers of the population around the world that are going to be coming online, that are going to expect that secure experience, that tailored experience, that individual experience, and they're going to expect it quickly, and they're going to expect it right now. So everybody needs to be thinking about that.
Carla, I love talking to you. You make me want to change my closing thought again. Here's my closing thought in one sentence. Start with the end experience you want to deliver first and work backwards. If there's technology that'll solve for it, think about the end experience you want to deliver first and work backwards. That's my new closing thought.
So I think in terms of what I've gotten out of this is that there is a couple of things. There is your traditional data centers, your cloud environments, that multi-cloud sort of environments, that brick and mortar office locations, all of these combinations that work from the coffee shop, work from home, it all needs to be part of the end user experience in terms of what they're going to achieve and what they want to do and how they want to work. And for everybody, it's going to be a slightly different, match in terms of how they're going to be using all of those options. The experience needs to be consistent for the end user, irrespective of where they are, and it's that always connected, consistency in the way that they're experiencing it, separation of their data, their personal data from the corporate data, and being able to isolate those sort of components. And I think that the key thing over here is that it should be inherently secure by nature. It shouldn't be an add-on or a bolt-on the way we've done it up until now. Exactly. So I think that this has been a really, really good session. There's been so many different areas that have been explored over this, during this, 45 minutes or so. And I really appreciate your time, both Dan and Carla. I think we definitely do this again sometime. And thanks very much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to watch this session. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Great, Zane. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zane.